23 minutes before the ballroom doors opened for a living donor gala where I was supposed to introduce my husband, I found another woman's name at the chair on his other side. The card read Vanessa Cole, guest of Mark Whitaker. Mark watched me pick it up and said, "You're still doing the introduction. We are not turning this into a scene." I had not known Vanessa was coming. I had not known she was his guest. Until that moment, I had not known my husband of 26 years was having an affair. We were standing in a ballroom at the Grayson Hotel in Columbus, Ohio, under a blue-lit sign that said Living Forward. 8 years earlier, I had donated a kidney to Mark after an inherited disease left him on dialysis. Riverbend Transplant Alliance had invited us to speak about living donation several times since then, and that night the organization planned to give us its Shared Courage Award. My job was to tell 200 donors, recipients, physicians, volunteers, and corporate sponsors that saving Mark's life had been a decision we carried together. Mark's revised plan was apparently for me to say those words, smile for the live stream, and then move aside while Vanessa sat with him. That afternoon, Mark had rehearsed beside me and corrected a date in my speech. He had kissed my cheek when the photographer asked us to stand closer. Nothing in his manner suggested that before dessert he intended to change our marriage from a fact into a piece of event history. I knew Vanessa as a training manager at Mark's insurance company, but I asked why she was his guest. He glanced at the ballroom doors and said this was not the place for that conversation. I told him to remove her card. He did not move, then delivered the answer he had prepared. He and Vanessa had been involved for 14 months. He had intended to let me give the speech first, then tell me before Vanessa moved into that chair, but a sponsor relations manager questioned the seating change. He said our marriage had been functionally over for a long time, although we had eaten breakfast together that morning, shared a bed the night before, and deposited both salaries into the same household account on Friday. Vanessa believed I knew we were separating. Mark wanted the evening to demonstrate that we could support each other as family while beginning different lives. I asked whether his version of support required me to introduce the woman replacing me. "You are introducing me," he said. "Vanessa is sitting with me afterward." I held up the speech folder. The first line read, "When Mark got sick, our marriage became a promise neither of us had to carry alone." The last line asked guests to celebrate the man I was proud to call my husband. Mark had placed yellow marks where he wanted me to pause. "Does Vanessa know what this says?" I asked. He said she knew the gala was recognizing our transplant story, not our current marriage. Then he gave me the moral argument he thought would make refusal impossible. Riverbend had used our names in invitations. The livestream sponsor had paid for a featured story. Several people at the event were waiting for kidneys. If I withdrew, donors might think I regretted the surgery or opposed the program. "Whatever is happening between us," he said, "you do not punish patients for it." My first reaction was not anger. It was the old panic I had learned during Mark's illness. If I made the wrong choice, someone vulnerable would pay. For 18 months before the transplant, our lives had narrowed to lab reports, dialysis, and medication alarms. I was 43, a public school librarian, when Mark's brother was ruled out and I began testing. The donor advocate repeatedly reminded me that marriage gave Mark no claim to my kidney and that I could stop. I chose freely. The surgery worked, although my recovery lasted longer than our later campaign video suggested. In that video, Mark said I had given him a second life. Until I saw Vanessa's card, I had heard gratitude in the phrase, not permission to keep using my part of the story. Mark claimed he had only tightened my introduction, but a paragraph about mutual care had been replaced with a line about releasing people to become who survival made them. It quietly prepared the audience to treat his new relationship as something I had blessed. Mark admitted he suggested the change and told event director Helen Park that we were redefining our marriage with my support. That was one lie I could correct without addressing the ballroom. I carried the folder toward the service corridor where Helen had been checking the run sheet. Mark followed and caught my elbow lightly, not enough to hurt, but enough to stop me. "Dana, listen to me. You gave me a kidney. You did not buy the rest of my life." I pulled my arm free. "I know exactly what I gave you," I said. "That is why you do not get to spend the story twice." The words came out more steadily than I felt. Mark said I was proving his point by treating the donation as a debt. I told him I was doing the opposite. His kidney was his, My medical history, my name, and my agreement to perform a happy marriage were not. Helen stood near a rolling rack of table linens with a headset around her neck. She smiled when she saw us, then stopped when she saw my face. I asked whether the program could continue if Mark and I withdrew from the award segment. She said they had a backup recipient panel because keynote travel sometimes failed, but she wanted to know whether this was a medical issue. I said no. I told her I had just learned that the relationship description in my introduction was false and that changes had been submitted in my name without my approval. I would not deliver the speech, participate in the couple presentation, or sign the livestream release waiting in the green room. I was not withdrawing support from Living Donation, and I did not want the gala canceled. I wanted my story removed from the segment before it was broadcast. Helen compared the folder with her tablet and asked whether Mark had submitted the edits through his sponsor liaison. He claimed we had discussed separation. I said, we had not. Helen asked him to wait outside and told him sponsorship did not control my participation. In the green room, staff removed my microphone. The release authorized future use of that night's interview and medical account, but my signature line was blank. Beside the form sat a framed plaque covered with tissue paper. Helen pulled the paper back. The plaque did not say Shared Courage Award Mark and Dana Whitaker, as the invitation had. It said Mark Whitaker Second Chance Honoree. I asked when it changed. Helen checked the production email. The request had come from Mark 11 days earlier. He wrote that I preferred not to have my name on permanent materials but remained enthusiastic about introducing him and allowing the original donor video to play. None of that was true. Helen's staff had accepted the request because it appeared considerate. A private donor avoiding attention while still supporting the recipient. The revised speech, the single-name plaque, the old video, and Vanessa's seat were not last-minute responses to a sponsor's question. They were pieces of a transition Mark had built before telling me it existed. He planned to remove my name from the honor, keep my face in the evidence of his courage, and use my own voice to make the exchange look voluntary. Helen asked if I wanted the plaque destroyed. I said no. It was Riverbend's property, and destruction would not correct the program. I asked her to replace the entire segment. She said she could do that, but the printed booklets already listed us. I told her the booklet could remain. Paper did not compel me to perform the description printed on it. Then someone knocked. Vanessa stood in the doorway wearing a dark green dress and holding a silver clutch. She looked from me to the unsigned release on the table. Mark said you wanted to speak with me before we went in, she said. I had not sent for her. Helen offered to leave, but I asked her to stay because this was now connected to the event plan. Vanessa looked confused. Dana, he said you and he agreed tonight would make everything clear. I asked what exactly Mark said I had agreed to. Vanessa answered, that you would introduce him, that the video would explain what you had been to each other, and that after the award he would introduce me as the person he is with now. Mark had not only counted on my silence. He had sold it to Vanessa as consent. Vanessa set her clutch on the counter as if she needed both hands free to understand what I had said. She asked whether Mark and I were separated. I said no. She asked whether I knew about them. I said I had learned 14 minutes earlier, beside her place card. The color left her face, but she did not look at me for sympathy. She turned to Helen and said, I should not be in the program. Helen answered that she was not listed in the program, only on the seating chart, and that staff would move her place if she wished. Vanessa nodded. Then Mark appeared in the doorway. He had evidently ignored Helen's request to wait in the ballroom. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent, he said. Vanessa asked him one question. Did Dana agree that tonight was when we became public? Mark said the three of us were too emotional to argue over wording. Vanessa repeated the question. He told her he had said Dana understood the marriage was ending, not that she had approved every detail. You said she chose the introduction, Vanessa said. You said it was her way of showing there was no hostility. Mark looked at me as though I had arranged the contradiction. He told Vanessa they would speak after the gala and told me Helen needed an answer because doors opened in 6 minutes. Helen said she had my answer, but not the authority to settle every part of the program. She could cancel my live interview, remove my name from the introduction, and move Vanessa's seat. The old video came under an earlier release, and the award belonged to a committee, so she put both on hold until Executive Director Elaine Brooks reached the green room. Mark seized on the distinction. He said Riverbend had promoted his transplant for weeks and could not erase him because his marriage had changed. Helen answered that she was not erasing him. She was stopping a disputed segment 6 minutes before doors opened. Mark's expression changed then. Until that moment he had treated my refusal as an emotional flare he could wait out. Helen's run sheet made it real. His company had bought the largest table, and his supervisor, 2 vice presidents, and several clients were waiting outside. "Do you know what they'll call me if you walk out?" he asked me. "The man who took his wife's kidney and left her." There it was, not regret, but fear of the accurate headline. He asked Helen for 5 minutes alone with me. I said no. Dana, 26 years, deserves 5 minutes. It deserved 5 minutes before you assigned that chair. I nodded toward Vanessa, who flinched. I regretted aiming it through her, even if it was accurate. I told her that was not an accusation against her. She said quietly, "It should be." I knew he was married. She had believed the marriage was ending with my knowledge, but she had still accepted a private relationship for 14 months. I did not absolve her, and I did not need to prosecute her in a hotel green room. She picked up her clutch and asked Helen for a seat away from Mark's table while she arranged a ride. Mark stepped between her and the hallway, not threateningly, but with the reflex of a man trying to keep every person inside the version he had prepared. "If you walk out now, you make it look worse," he said. Vanessa stared at him. Worse for whom? She moved around him and left with a volunteer. The executive director, Dr. Elaine Brooks, arrived carrying the event booklet folded open to our page. Helen gave her a concise account. My participation and release had not been secured for the revised presentation. The relationship language was disputed. The named honoree had requested unapproved changes. The backup panel was ready. Dr. Brooks first asked whether I had signed the earlier video release. I had. She opened the archived form on Helen's tablet. The language was broad enough to cover the old interview and photographs, but it said nothing about presenting them beneath a new account of our marriage. Mark saw the signature and said, "Then you can play it." I said I understood that I could not make an old agreement disappear in a hotel green room. Dr. Brooks called the audiovisual lead and asked whether the sponsor acknowledgement and our donor video were separate files. They were. The paid sponsor slate could remain while the personal video was removed. She told Mark the footage had been accurate when recorded, but using it to support a disputed introduction would be a new editorial choice. With 2 minutes left before the opening sequence locked, she told the technician to substitute Riverbend's general donor reel. The decision did not depend on declaring either spouse legally or morally right. It depended on whether the organization was willing to broadcast a claim it had just learned might be false. She could not promise to remove the video from every Riverbend page that night, but she would stop its Gala playback because the surrounding introduction no longer described a relationship we both recognized. The website used would go to review the next business day. I accepted that distinction. I was withdrawing from a new performance, not pretending an old signature had never existed. The printed booklet could not be recalled, but the host could announce a programming change without giving a reason. Mark asked to receive his award and speak alone. Dr. Brooks said the committee had approved a shared story, then accepted his request for a single-name plaque on the representation that I supported it. Because that representation was false, the award would be held pending review. "You are punishing me for a personal disagreement," he said. "No," she replied. "We are declining to certify a story we cannot verify." The distinction mattered. Nobody took away Mark's transplant, his work, or his right to be in the room. He simply lost control of a stage that had never belonged to him. A volunteer opened the door and told Helen the reception was being seated. Through the gap I heard glasses, chairs, and the low roar of 200 conversations. The ordinary machinery of the gala continued. I had imagined that refusing Mark would detonate the evening. Instead, staff adjusted slides, moved 2 chairs, and handed the host a new card. That calm exposed how much of the emergency had existed only in Mark's warning. Patients were not going to lose kidneys because I declined to perform a false marriage. Donors were not going to flee because a 12-minute segment changed. The people at risk were Mark's image and the story he had promised Vanessa. Helen asked whether I wanted to leave through the service elevator. I nearly said yes. My coat was in the check room, my car was 3 levels below us, and I could be home before dessert. Then I remembered why I had agreed to attend before Mark turned the gala into an exit ceremony. A living donor named Priya Shah was on the backup panel with her brother. I had met her at rehearsals, and she was nervous about speaking. Leaving would be reasonable, but it would also let Mark define my refusal as rejection of everyone in the room. I told Helen I would stay if I could sit at an open volunteer table, with no camera interview and no introduction as Mark's wife. I would not approach his sponsors or discuss the affair. Dr. Brooks said that was acceptable. So you're staying where everyone can look at you and guess, Mark said. I'm staying for the program. And when people ask, I'll say the segment changed. He lowered his voice. They'll know I did something. I told him I could not manage what his colleagues guessed. He called that punishment disguised as principle, an accusation he had used when illness made both of us rigid and frightened. I had sometimes pushed too hard about medication and travel. I could admit that without accepting words added to my speech. We can argue about the marriage later, I said. I'm not doing this presentation. Helen handed me a temporary place card with only my name. No spouse designation, no donor label, just Dana Whitaker. She led me along the edge of the ballroom after the lights dimmed. Most guests were watching the opening film and did not see us enter. Mark went to his company table. One empty chair remained beside his, its place card removed. I sat near the back with 3 volunteer coordinators and a retired transplant nurse named Marisol. She squeezed my hand because she assumed I had stage fright. I let her assume it. The host welcomed the guests, thanked the sponsors, and announced that the shared courage presentation would be replaced by a conversation among donor families. There was a rustle at Mark's table. One of his vice presidents leaned close to him. Mark answered without looking my way. No one gasped. No spotlight searched for a villain. The auction began, then dinner service. My phone filled with messages from Mark telling me to leave with him, stop involving staff, and avoid Vanessa. I answered only that I would arrange my own ride and would not speak with him alone that night. My sister Carla agreed to meet me in the lobby and let me stay with her. No questions until I was ready. I had not yet cried. My hands shook only when I tried to lift my water glass. So I held it with both palms and watched the stage. Staying was not courage. It was the shortest path through the next hour without letting Mark turn my departure into evidence that I opposed the people Riverbend served. On stage, Priya began too quickly, then stopped and admitted she had been terrified before donating to her brother. The audience laughed gently when her brother said she had been bossing him around since kindergarten and saw no reason to stop after surgery. Their story was warm without pretending generosity made either of them perfect. They spoke about the donor's independent advocate, lost wages, recovery, and the importance of asking for help. It was more useful than the polished video Mark and I had made. When Priya finished, people applauded, not for me or against Mark, but for her. That was when the last part of his leverage disappeared. The mission did not need our marriage. During dessert, Helen came to my table with a single-page form. It confirmed that I had declined recording and future promotional use that evening. She asked whether I would be willing to make a brief off-camera statement to the committee after the gala so there would be a record in my own words. I agreed. Mark saw the form. He left his table and approached while the host was announcing raffle winners. "Are you filing something against me?" he whispered. "I'm making sure the record says I withdrew. You agreed months ago. Not to this version." A woman at the next table turned toward us. I lowered my voice further and asked Mark to return to his seat. He said if I made him walk back alone, every colleague there would know something was wrong. I looked at the empty chair he had reserved for Vanessa. "Something is wrong," I said. "I am no longer helping you disguise it." He stood there long enough for his supervisor to notice. Then Dr. Brooks came beside us and asked whether he needed assistance. Mark said no and returned to his table. No relief followed him back. My hands stayed cold as the delayed shock reached me. I had one kidney, a 26-year marriage that might already be over, and a husband who had counted on the surgery making refusal look cruel. Declining his speech did not reverse what I had given or injure what he still carried. It stopped only the performance he had built around it. When the gala ended, 2 guests asked why our presentation had changed. I said only that it was no longer accurate and Riverbend had used its backup panel. Mark's supervisor, Leonard, asked whether there had been a health emergency. Mark called it a private difference about messaging, and I confirmed that Riverbend had handled the program appropriately. After Leonard left, Mark accused me of enjoying the correction. "No," I said. "I just won't repeat your version." Then I collected my coat. Carla was waiting downstairs. Near the ballroom doors, I saw Vanessa speaking with Helen. She had removed her table badge and was waiting for a rideshare. She did not ask me to forgive her. She said Mark had told her he moved into the guest room in January, and that we had delayed announcing our separation until after his mother's surgery. He had not moved into our guest room. His mother had not had surgery. Vanessa showed me one message only because it contained my name. For weeks earlier, Mark had written, "Dana offered to introduce me because she wants the donor story to end with grace. I asked her to send it to me, and she did. Vanessa forwarded it to me while Helen watched, then asked me not to contact her again. I agreed. I did not ask to see their photographs or the rest of their messages. One lie with my name on it was enough." Mark came through the doors as Vanessa's car arrived. He looked at the two of us and understood that his separate stories had met. "Whatever she showed you is out of context," he said. Vanessa walked past him. I followed several steps behind, not beside her. Outside, rain shone under the hotel lights. Carla waited at the curb. Mark called my name, then said, "You cannot erase 8 years because tonight hurt you." I turned before getting into Carla's car. "I am not erasing 8 years," I said. "I am ending the part where you used them to write my answer." Once we reached Carla's house, I changed my personal passwords and downloaded a year of joint statements without freezing money or canceling Mark's cards. Information was different from retaliation. I emailed that I was safe, that we would discuss the house and finances in writing, and that he must preserve the Gala emails and stop contacting Riverbend in my name. Mark replied that he was sorry I had learned in the worst possible setting, and claimed the transplant taught him life was short. He apologized for the timing, not the lie. I slept for less than an hour and woke each time my phone lit the room. Near 2 in the morning, Carla found me awake and asked whether I believed the kidney entitled me to Mark's life. "No," I said, "but I thought telling the truth was included in marriage without a purchase price." The next morning, Mark asked when I was coming home. I said I would arrive at 10 with Carla to collect clothes, medication, work materials, and documents. He objected to my bringing her because it made him feel accused. I answered that her presence kept the visit practical. When we arrived, he had placed the Gala booklet and our framed transplant photograph on the dining table, as if arranging exhibits for his defense. He looked exhausted. He said he loved me, but not in the way I deserved, and that he had postponed telling me because every possible date seemed cruel. Our anniversary, the holidays, the Gala planning, his annual transplant tests. There was always a reason, he said. I looked at the edited speech beside the photograph. "You found a date," I told him. "You just planned for me to announce it without knowing." He insisted he had never meant to humiliate me. He had believed that if the audience saw us honor the past, people would accept the future without choosing sides. I asked why the plaque honored only him. He said donors were supposed to give without expecting recognition. "I did," I said. "You are the one who needed my donation on the screen while removing my name from the object you took home." He had no reply to that. Carla stood in the doorway and said nothing. I packed 2 suitcases. Before I left, Mark asked whether I regretted the transplant. I answered carefully because I knew the question would return in different forms. I did not regret that he was alive. I regretted allowing our public story to become so simple that gratitude made him noble and giving made me permanently agreeable. Those were not the same regret. I took no wedding photographs and left the transplant photograph where he had placed it. At noon, Helen sent a factual summary from Riverbend. The Gala had met its fundraising target. The backup panel segment would be included in the donor education archive. Our old video had been temporarily taken offline while the organization reviewed its releases. The award committee had withdrawn that year's presentation rather than transfer it to either of us. No public statement named us, and no donor or patient service had been affected. She asked me to confirm the record of my withdrawal. I corrected one sentence that described the revised speech as mutually developed. Then I signed only the acknowledgement of what had happened. That document was not revenge, confession, or leverage in a divorce. It was a line no one could move later. Mark sent one more message after Riverbend notified him. You got what you wanted. I looked around Carla's spare room, at 2 suitcases and a phone charger I had forgotten to pack, and almost laughed at how little it resembled victory. I wrote back, what I wanted was not to say words you wrote for me. Everything else is the consequence of what you chose. After that, I called a family law attorney whose name Carla's neighbor gave us. For the first time since I had picked up Vanessa's place card, the next decision belonged only to the life in front of me, not the life Mark claimed I owed him. The attorney's first useful act was to make the situation less dramatic. Ohio did not have a special category for betrayal at a fundraiser. There would be disclosure of assets, temporary agreements, and decisions about a house neither of us could afford to keep comfortably on one income. My donation did not give me a larger share of the marriage, and Mark's affair did not automatically give him a smaller one. I found that oddly relieving. I did not want a court to price my kidney or convert it into marital credit. I wanted accurate numbers and a lawful exit. Mark remained in the house while I rented near the school, and we paid joint obligations in proportion to our incomes until division. He kept his insurance and transplant care. After 30 days, his brother replaced me as emergency contact. We tried 2 counseling sessions because I needed to know whether Mark could describe the gala without blaming Vanessa, me, or the kidney. He called it a bridge, and the counselor asked who had agreed to cross it. Mark's silence ended counseling. I did not send affair messages to his company or publish the seating card. His employer addressed only his misuse of its sponsor liaison. He kept his job but lost responsibility for Riverbend sponsorships that year. Vanessa later transferred regions, and I did not ask whether they stayed together. The divorce was final by early summer. We sold the house and divided retirement accounts, furniture, and 26 years of basement boxes. I kept the bookcase my father built. Mark kept the dining table where he had displayed the gala booklet. The transplant photograph went into a box neither of us requested. The kidney could not be divided or returned. It kept doing its work. In our last email about insurance, Mark wrote that his transplant team was satisfied with his latest labs. Relief and grief arrived together, and I no longer required his health and our failed marriage to cancel each other. Riverbend completed its review that spring. The original video had been recorded under a broad media release, so the organization had been legally entitled to keep using it. Dr. Brooks chose to retire it anyway because its description of us as a current couple was outdated. More importantly, Riverbend changed its process. Every adult whose medical story appeared in a featured segment would approve the final script and receive a separate release for live use. A sponsor could not revise another participant's role through a liaison. Helen told me the changes were not named after us and would apply to everyone. That was exactly what I wanted. My worst evening did not need to become another monument with my name engraved on it. Mark appealed the award decision once. The committee offered to recognize his transplant anniversary in a general recipient role the following year, without our video or a personal speech. He declined. I heard about that only because the committee copied me when closing the file. For months, I left Riverbend's envelopes unopened and changed the channel when transplant commercials turned a complicated medical choice into a perfect embrace. I still believed in living donation. I just could not keep treating an old yes as the answer to every new request. On the transplant anniversary, Carla brought takeout instead of calling me a hero, and we complained about the school copier. The library's ordinary demands were merciful because none treated my past as a permanent role. By fall, I could admit that Mark's care after surgery and our years of shared kindness had been real. His later deception did not make every memory counterfeit, and recognizing that did not require reconciliation. My annual donor follow-up came the next month. The nurse checked my blood pressure twice, and the physician reviewed kidney function results that remained stable. At registration, Mark was still listed as my emergency contact from the year before. I crossed out his number and wrote Carla's. The coordinator asked whether the change was temporary. No, I said, and she updated the record without asking me to explain my marriage. During the appointment, nobody asked how Mark was doing. For 8 years, our checkups had seemed connected even when they happened in different clinics. That morning, the separation was clinical and complete. It hurt, but it also meant my health could be discussed without turning into a report on his life. I scheduled the next year's labs, put the appointment card in my wallet, and went directly to the school library. 11 months after the gala, Helen sent a third invitation. I had declined 2 public panels, but this was a small Saturday orientation for people considering living donation, with no camera and no recipient on stage beside me. The form included the questions in advance, a recording choice already set to a no, and a box asking how I wanted to be identified. I left it open for 2 days, then agreed. On Saturday morning, I entered Riverbend through a side door I had used during testing 8 years earlier. The orientation room held 14 people in folding chairs. Some were considering donation to relatives. 2 were exploring non-directed donation. A social worker explained evaluation, surgical risks, lost work, and the right to withdraw without giving a reason. Nothing in the room promised that sacrifice would perfect a relationship. Helen met me near the coffee station and handed me a badge. It read Dana Whitaker, Living Donor. I looked at it longer than necessary. At the gala, my name had first been attached to Mark as his wife, then removed from the plaque while my face remained useful. On this badge, the description belonged to something I had chosen and could choose to discuss. I pinned it to my sweater. Before the session, Helen asked whether any question was off limits. I said I would not discuss the recipient's current life or our divorce in detail. I would talk about my decision, recovery, and the pressure donors sometimes place on themselves. She wrote that boundary on the moderator's page. When my turn came, I did not stand on a stage. I sat in the open chair at the end of a semicircle. I told the group that donation had been physically harder than my old campaign video suggested. I was back at school in 6 weeks, but fatigue lasted longer, and accepting help had embarrassed me. I told them the independent advocate was not an obstacle to generosity. That person protected the part of generosity that made it real. A man across from me said his younger brother needed a kidney, but everyone in the family already spoke as if he had agreed. He asked how to know whether his yes was truly his. I told him to repeat those exact words privately to the donor advocate and ask his family to stop describing the decision as finished. If no doesn't feel available yet, you're not ready to give them yes, I said. The social worker nodded and added the clinical steps. Near the end, a woman named Tessa waited until the others had asked about scars, travel, and insurance. She said her husband was the intended recipient and asked, "Do you ever regret giving it?" The room became still. A year earlier, Mark had asked the same question while trying to make my answer protect him. Tessa was asking because she needed to understand a future she could not control. "I regret how I let the surgery be used later," I said. "I don't regret the surgery." She asked whether I would donate if I had known the marriage would end. "I don't know," I said. At 43, I chose with what I knew then. What happened later doesn't rewrite that day, and that day doesn't decide everything I do now. Tessa wrote something in the margin of her folder. Nobody applauded. They simply continued asking questions, which was better. After the session, the man with the younger brother requested a private appointment with the donor advocate. Tessa thanked me and said she had been afraid that doubt made her selfish. I told her doubt was one of the reasons evaluation existed. Outside the room, Helen asked whether I wanted Riverbend to invite me again. This time the question did not feel like a hook. I said she could ask and I would decide each time. She smiled and said, "That is how it should work." I removed the badge in the parking lot and slid it into my notebook. Mark still had the kidney, and I was glad it worked. He also had his job, his condominium, and a life that no longer required my narration. At a red light, I opened the notebook and read the badge again. Dana Whitaker, Living Donor. No wife of, no recipient's name, no sentence waiting for me to perform. The light changed and I drove home,